Welcome back to the Bonsai Builders podcast. This episode is a particularly special one for me. When we start our bonsai journey, we all kind of look for guides, people to help us even start and see the path. And today I have the honor of speaking with one of my very first teachers, Jerry Carpenter. This is someone that I worked with very closely and learned so much from at the bonsai garden at Lake Merritt in the very beginning of my journey. So I'm really excited to have Jerry on and talk to him about his own journey as well as his experiences in the Bay Area. So Jerry, thank you. It's good to have you. Good to have you on.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
So yeah, I wanted to, first of all, give you a chance to introduce yourself for folks. And then I would love to hear a little bit more about the details of your bonsai journey. I know we've obviously worked together a lot, but I don't know if I know the whole story of Jerry and bonsai.
Just say, be careful what you're asking for, because you're asking for a lot. But at any rate, I'm Jerry Carpenter. I've been in the Bay Area since 2000. My bonsai journey started in the 80s, early 80s, and so I've been doing this a while. So now I'm an old guy in the trade. And so an interesting thing about this process is that I was born and raised in West Virginia, so I was used to having the trees around me and being in the landscape and, fishing and hunting and all that kind of fun stuff. And then as I started migrating to the cities, I went to Kentucky for a school, but that was still in the woods. And by the time I had gotten out of finished college, I simply said, well, okay, now I'm stuck in New Jersey for a year and I have no nature around me anymore. So I started wanting to learn how to keep plants and trees around. And so when I got to Washington, D.C., I actually went to the Arboretum to the bonsai garden there. And it was eye-opening and inspirational to me. And so I went home and looked up the books in the library and started my own stuff with tropical trees, and then would go back to the Arboretum periodically and chat with the folks there and learn what I could from them. So that's the journey began with tropical trees, trying to replicate my life in the forest, so to speak, because I wanted to have it closer to me than being in a big city with no greenery, so to speak, around me.
That makes a lot of sense. I love that journey of growing up around nature and then being in a more urbanized space and seeing bonsai as that bridge between kind of your desire to have that feeling from nature. That's very interesting also, that it sounds like for both of us, our journey started with, an experience at an arboretum, or for me, the bonsai garden at Lake Merritt. And did you have a Jerry at the National Arboretum?
One would wish, but the curator at that particular arboretum was very overly busy. He had, when I joined there, started coming regularly, he had very few people handpicked to do some work on trees, but they really didn't actually touch the trees. He was a stickler for, this is the way the master gave it to us, this is the way the artist wanted it, so we're going to maintain this tree in that style. So for me, that's very rigid. And that's obviously not where I wanted to go in my training in general. So I would only go back there when I was looking for, okay, give me some ideas about soils, give me some ideas about, care and the horticultural side of the fence, so that they could provide the horticulture stuff. They could not provide for me much guidance on design and so forth, and trimming and all that stuff. So where I got all that information from was books. We didn't have YouTube in those days, so you had to read books and then just talk to people who also did it. And so one thing about going to a arboretum like that is that you can always run across colleagues who do the same thing you're doing, but obviously getting what they can from the arboretum itself, and then you go back and you do your thing. So eventually there were a few of us who got together to work on a few of our larger tropical trees in DC, and we kind of, would get together and experiment and talk about what was right and what was going wrong.
Interesting. So you kind of formed your own mini club. You weren't part of like an official club at that time? I don't know how many there were in that area, even on the East Coast too.
Yeah, there supposedly were some, but I just was not. They were in occasions where I couldn't get to or couldn't connect with.
Yeah.
So I never went to those.
What drew you to tropicals?
So trees, forest comes inside with me because it was really hard to deal with creating. Oh, you live I've lived in a variety of different places around Washington D.C. Only one of those particular places had a balcony, which let me put trees outside. But when I first began working with things, I was in an apartment like I am even today. So I went to tropicals because, hey, you can grow tropical trees indoors, right? Well, so anyway, but that's where I started, and I actually was quite successful with some species, tropical species, indoors, growing huge trunks and tiny leaves, and getting lighting systems set up and humidity levels correct and the like in my windows until the winter came, and then winter came, I had to move them out of the windows. But you do what you can do.
It had to be kind of an exciting time, though. You were definitely like trailblazing, right? And
Sure. I learned and failed.
What was one of the funniest failures? Like looking back, you're like, why did I try this? Or not knowing what you know now,
Sure. So I've always wanted to be able to do azaleas. I can't do azaleas here either because my water sucks, right? And it's not one of those things you think about, but azaleas also can't do indoors, right? But I didn't know that. So, you go to a nursery, you pick up a little azalea, you put some effort and into it, and like, didn't know how to trim it well, didn't know it, but so thrip got it so bad it was just dripping all over the place. And that one went in the trash bin. So you have to learn very quickly what can grow indoors and what can't grow.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Basic trips to greenhouses was where you learned that certain kinds of plants will work better in the indoors environment.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, there's a lot of the like basics of horticulture that we can learn from the nursery industry, right? Where they've been doing this for a long time. So definitely not the aesthetic part, though, and obviously they don't wire or things like that. How did you start learning how to wire, or like where was that on the journey, or did you start with more of like clip and grow, or?
So in the very beginning, it was clip and grow. And then it went to aluminum wire on tropical bonsai trees. I mean, the learning how to do that was a very special amount of pressure you could add to the wire in order to make the tree guide the tree where it was going to go. I mean, there were some books back in the day that were doing tie-down methods, so they would take a branch and tie a string up here and anchor it down the ground somewhere and to try to get it to go like a butterfly. But the only way to really make the branches go the way you wanted to, according to the Japanese style, was to wire it. So we learned how to do that with, again, a lot of trial and error. So you put aluminum wire on a bonsai tree and you forget to check it 6 months later and the limb is dead because you killed it. There's a lot of trial and error. So you learned that it didn't stay on there very long. It was off after a month or so, and let it grow again.
When did you move to the Bay Area?
2000. So in September of 2000, to start a new job that I applied for when I was here visiting, got the job and moved across country.
Cool.
And that was traumatic for me because I didn't know how to bring trees into California. Everybody said, you can't bring them. You can't bring them. So I sold all of my huge, beautiful, well-ramified scheffleras and all those, the tea trees and all those that I sold them. And, I was mourning them worse than a dog.
Yeah, that sounds pretty tough. Because you'd been doing bonsai for 20 years almost at that point, right?
Well, a good 15 there, about, yeah, sure. So, yeah, I mean, it was, it was a bit traumatic. I did not enjoy that process.
Yeah.
So I gave all those trees up and then had to start all over again when I got here.
Did you pick it up right away again? And
yeah.
Did you join a club at that point? Were you joining
Seigoku
at that point, or?
No, not there. So when I first came to California, I was living up in the Santa Cruz Mountains, back to the woods, and I had a few nice little trees that I was developing up there that were no longer tropical. I had branched out and got some junipers from a local nursery and began playing with those, and finding that their techniques of growing a juniper was very different than growing a ficus, for example. But the temperatures here were really great. I mean, you could I left my tropicals out all winter long, except for when the snow days hit up in the Santa Cruz Mountains. But in general, I mean, you could leave everything outdoors all the time. And so that was a big difference until the deer come along and then wipe you out. And I learned about rodents in a different way, and squirrels and the like that I didn't have back on the East Coast. And then all of a sudden, I started looking around because I wanted a community to go to, and that's when I started visiting a few clubs. wasn't always accepted on some of the clubs I went to, but went to Kusamora Bonsai Club, and so that was my first club in the Bay Area.
Very cool. Yeah, Kusamura is a great club. At what point did you get involved with the BGLM?
Well, so while I was in Kusamora, I started working with John and Sandy Planting. They're rather infamous in the Bay Area, and I had to learn a whole bunch of new skills again. John was very patient with me, and John and I really picked it up really well and started doing some species I never thought I would end up doing. Went to copper wiring instead of aluminum, did all that stuff. And then one of our members of Kusamora named Lonnie McCormick worked at the Bonsai Garden and with Stephanie North up there as well. And they said, "Hey, Jerry, you should come up and join us." And so that's when I started that journey. And it was only like a year and a half after being here and being in the club that I started going up there once a month, at least, back in that period of time, to work with those two. And Stephanie would work on Shohins, and Lonnie would work on big stuff, and we just had a field day.
Yeah, what was the garden was founded in, 25 years ago-ish? Is that great? In around 2000, or when was it?
Isn't it 98 or something like that?
Yeah, 1999. Whenever you started to volunteer there, right?
Sure.
How was it? What was it like then?
Well, it was
compared
infantile.
to now, and yeah,
it was in its infancy, and so they had been donated, however, exquisite material. And so one of the things that when you walk into the BGLM arena, you start dealing with trees that have already been in production for 50 or plus years, and you start learning about the early masters in the Bay Area, and then studying under a few of the folks. And then Seiji was there when I started, and he and I did a lot of learning back and forth from him. And so you learn a lot of that culture and the sensitivity to the Japanese style that I didn't have before, and just things take off like a wild thing then. And the garden was very young, and it wasn't anywhere near as populated as it is today. Today there are so many goddamn trees out there, you just want to scream. And too many different styles and too many different people playing with them. But anyway, back then there weren't. Back then there were very specific curators that dealt with very specific trees, which gave me an opportunity to become a curator in working with certain species like the olives and the subtropical trees, which I enjoyed.
Yeah, that's how I started working with you. Was you would come on the weekends, and that was I was working, so that was when I could go as well, because I was living in Oakland. And I think I stopped in with my mom. She was visiting, and we saw, I think, you and Kathy in the back.
Yeah.
Working on repotting or something like that, and
Sure.
We just came up and we're like, "Hey, can I help too?" And I think Kathy said something like, "Oh, we don't need help right now, but if you come back next weekend, we can fit you in." And I came back the next weekend and I helped with repotting, holding a tree or something. I don't remember exactly what, but yeah, exactly. Yeah, but I have very vivid memories of you teaching me how to do the tie downs and everything like that, and Kathy talking about the pin method for the screens in the bottom and cleaning out the pot properly and stuff like that.
Well, speaking of Kathy was the star of my career. She taught me so much. To work under a Japanese trained master like that in the Bay Area was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. And we bonded really, really well on so many different levels. And she would ask me IT questions and I would fix things for her. And I would ask her, of course, bonsai things, and we would just go crazy. And we'd work until, 11 o'clock midnight on some nights doing tree stuff in the early days, back when we were allowed to do that because, things changed around the neighborhood.
Yeah, in the garden, yeah.
Yeah, so anyway, we spent way too much time together, having sake and drinking white wine and doing bonsai with that.
Okay, I would love to hear some of these stories. So, I mean, to me, it always seemed like you and Kathy had a very special, have a very special relationship. So, I would love to hear a little bit more about did she start working at the garden after you had already started, or was she already the curator at that time when you started? And then, like, I'd love to
She
learn
and
just how
so
did you meet her? And
she and Seiji were already working together.
okay,
And Gordon, of course, was in the garden. Gordon Deeg was in the garden. So that's a core group of people right there. I think it got to be in order to have time with any one of those particular teachers or masters or whatever, you had to like really put in the effort and show the commitment and be willing to be able to take instruction and go with it scenarios. And I think one of the reasons why Kathy and I got along so well is that she would say to me, blah, and I would go, do blah, and that would be fine. And then when I didn't do it right, she would just tell me to do it over again. One of my favorite stories with Kathy is that I was repotting this massive, it's not an elm, but it's a very similar leaf pattern. It's
a hornbeam or
hornbeam.
Okay.
So there's this really big sumo base hornbeam sitting in the garden, white trunk.
Yeah.
And huge pot, and it was heavy as hell. And she had worked with me on doing all these other smaller things, and then all of a sudden, she looks over to me and she says, I want you to repot the hornbeam. And I'm sitting there doing, with my fingernails in my mouth going, no. She said, and I said, but I can't do that by myself. She said, yes, you can, in Kathy's inimitable way. And I said, and it was one of those, and you weren't, I think you came around in that session some point along the time, and you were helping me hold the tree and the like. But I mean, it was literally, from taking a tree that was hugely heavy and hard to manage and needed to have its base and under trunk, chiseled away and cut back, and all the fun Kathy processes that you do with the root base. And I had to do all that myself, and then put it in the pot and position it and tie it down. And then she came over and she says, no, you need to move it over here. But we would laugh at that. And the way you learn is that you take on a project like that, you make a mistake, and then she how you need to fix it. And so I just redid the tie downs, put it back in the pot the right way, and learned that my fronts have to be right on.
Yep. Yeah, that's the most frustrating part of repotting. When you miss by just a little bit for the front, it's like, well, what am I going to look at this like this for the next few years? No,
right. And she would say, no, she's not going to look at that for that way. Next few years, you're going to fix that now.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, and that and one of the other ones that she and I bonded really well over was the big daimyo oak in the garden. So it's a monster, and it has quite a legacy. And we brought it back in the workshop area, and she and I worked on that daimyo oak for 2 days. So we couldn't get it all done by 11 something that night, and so we came back early the next morning and went back at it again, covered it with towels, kept it all wet, did all that kind of stuff, and put it in the pot that it's currently in. And I can tell you, we laughed and cursed and told stories through that entire 2-day period over that tree. I mean, it was a tough repot.
I remember I think you and I were complaining about something while we were repotting, or like, oh, this is difficult. And then Kathy was like, yeah, well, in my day, we had to do 150-pound trees with one hand, and within 2 hours. And she's a trooper, or she really could get it done. But I guess that's what comes from being a professional, right? You gotta make it happen, right? There's not always an extra set of hands.
She worked by herself in gardens all around the world and around, especially with clients in the country. And you learn how to
Yeah, I'm really happy that I started when I did and got a chance to work with her while she was out here. Definitely special memories to have. So, you had a pretty long stint as a curator at BGLM. What were, did the garden go through different kind of ebbs and flows, or were there specific periods where you felt the volunteer community and the community around it was really strong, and other times where it waned a little bit, or has it kind of consistently been kind of increasing or decreasing?
I have to be careful there because I get in trouble. I'll get in trouble telling stories out of school. But when I first started there, the community was really tight. the people like Lonnie and Kathy and others and Stephanie would tour around the clubs and would sell volunteerism at the BGLM as something to do, right? And to try to get people in, and would ask those of us who also did work there to bring people in to the fold, and so that they could have docents or tree workers and the like there. And that the community was really good then. And then directorship changes. Seiji passed away, and Gordon took over, and that was okay. It was good, but then after Gordon, we had a change of director again, and I just have to sit here and shake my head. And so yeah, so when the upper echelons and then you start seeing the volunteers start to age, they age out, and no one's going back out into the clubs to try to encourage them back in again. So we lost a lot of people to age.
Yeah.
The problem with bonsai communities is that we're old. People like you're 1 in a billion to find a young person comes in and excels at it.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to, it's a lot of the work gets done during the week at the garden too, right? So
Correct.
It's like
Correct.
For people who are, like we were kind of a skeleton crew on the weekends. You and I were sometimes the only people there other than the docent
Sure.
working on trees on weekends. So it's not super conducive to somebody who's not retired, right?
But it didn't used to be that way. So it used to be that when Kathy was around, she was there a lot more weekends, and so we had big groups of people whenever
like
Kathy was in whenever Kathy was in town and actually actively in the garden, the community would pour in the door, and to the point where they would always be asking Kathy a gazillion questions, and we couldn't get anything done. But anyway, the community was really good then. But then Kathy's time, got spread out, and again, leadership changes and structure changes in the garden. No one was taking care of the volunteers anymore. No one was really teaching them well. The curator system got a little messed up over the leadership changes, to the point where I just simply said, I put my name on the trees in the folders, and I would come back the following weekend and find the tree decimated by somebody who chose to pick it up and not read a folder. I mean,
yeah,
sorry,
that's got to be very frustrating.
The nightmares can begin to come out of the woodwork there. There was a lot of times that I came back and was super disappointed. And then finally, when the leaders in the garden could no longer devote the amount of time and attention needed, volunteers and the curator system fell apart almost completely. And so I would get really frustrated walking in, and somebody said, no, I'm doing that tree. My name's on this file. No, I'm doing that tree now. Okay, you can do that tree. And it just, the camaraderie and the teamwork failed.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, Kathy's big shoes to fill, right? So
yeah, absolutely.
And that kind of like sub-curator model really only works if you have that driving force that,
right,
like when the rubber meets the road, you have a consistent vision and you have a someone who can execute as well, right? So yeah, I'm curious to see how BGLM's a special place, so I want to see it
totally
continue to thrive, and I'm curious to see how that gap gets filled. I'm excited for I think Suzanne's been doing a good job. I'm excited for her to kind of take over and bring some of her ideas to the kind of directorship. So,
well, in the meantime, outside of BGLM, I was also working at Filoli Gardens. I don't know. Did you know about that?
I think I've heard the name before, but I'd love to hear more about it.
So Kusumura had a long time ago had several people who did bonsai work for Filoli Gardens in the state gardens. And they had a collection donated to them from people around the bay that these trees did not go to BGLM. Obviously, they went to Filoli. And so they had fallen into disrepair because the volunteer from the club that was doing that work got old and let it slip. And then when I came in as the president of the Kusumura Club, I said, well, let's go back to Filoli and see what the heck's going on with those trees. And so formed a team in that club, and we went out to Filoli and got accepted as a special project under Filoli. And so we had about 35 trees or so to recondition back into being bonsai again, because they were going absolutely crazy or dying, needless to say. So I got to work on a 100-year-old pine that had been donated to them as a root over rock pine. And one of my kind of claim to fame on the Filoli stuff is that we saved it. I showed them how to repot it. We got it repotted into a deeper pot. Took care of the candling and the like, which there weren't a lot of people who knew much about that at Filoli. And so we brought it back. And actually, strangely enough, that tree came to the Kusamura show a few years ago. And I'm like, oh my God, there's my tree.
Well, that's so cool. Yeah, that's so cool to see again. I'm wondering if there'll be a proliferation of kind of public collections in the Bay Area as time goes on, or if it'll continue to stay kind of centralized at BGLM. I guess it depends on the growth of the hobby and, you know, if there's new people coming in. So we'll see.
Sure. Yeah, right now I find it more going into private client environments, which is, I have a few clients around the Bay that I still work with, and they amass their trees.
Yeah. What's your... I mean, you've seen bonsai go through, obviously, a very big shift in costs and price over the years. Do you think that we have an abundance of material now? Do you think prices are high, prices are low? How is this relative to other times whenever people were trying to get into bonsai? Like, is the material that we have access to high quality relatively, or what's your take?
Oh my gosh, you're going to get me to be a truth sayer here, aren't you? So it's an interesting concept there, because when I first started in the Bay Area, the amount of good material available and stuff from digs and the like were quite prevalent. Today, that is not the case. Today, we're finding...
Interesting. You mean like Yamadori, like people collecting it? Oh, interesting.
Sure.
Okay.
And as you might be aware there too, the collecting community has kind of died off too. And unless you go to Southern California, where they're still doing some of that kind of work. And there's still some, like Midori does some collecting work, but not as much anymore, again, because of aging out. And Seiboku has tried to do a little bit of that. Kusamura did some of that too, but we just don't have a lot of good in-ground material coming at us. So a lot more of the material's nursery bound. And you get into nursery stuff, and they're spindly. They're not as, and it takes 50 years to grow a trunk.
Yeah, it's not a 100-year tree or a 50-year tree or whatever, right? Yeah.
Not at all. Not at all.
What kind of material was being collected? Like, was this mostly California junipers, or were there a variety of species, or what was coming up?
A lot of Sierra, a lot of Ponderosa pines, a lot of California junipers.
Okay.
The Sierras were probably the most precious ones, and I'm glad that I still have one. But, I think they were harder to find. A lot of those that ended up getting styled really well went to BGLM in the long run. And then there's still some of them out and about. Lonnie McCormick, again, did a lot of work in the pine world. So he got a lot of ground-grown pines, and those were precious. There aren't very many of those left around anymore, but they were, back in his day, quite lovely to see. Yeah, so I find the material now mostly, it's like an overpriced gambit at a casino. I find that there was this period of time where the lovely Jim Gremmels and the people coming back from Japan kept saying that your trees are undervalued, these can go for a lot more. And so we started seeing a 25-year-old tree go for $2,500. And that's not approachable to a lot of people in the Bay Area, especially those who are beginning in the art or not under official tutorage or instruction with somebody. Who wants to pay that amount of money and just have it go home and within a year die, right? Because they don't know how to deal with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I just saw tree prices go through the roof unexpectedly.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's high demand, and you're right, there's not the supply is lower. Our club, the East Bay, we've organized collecting trips the last 2 years, so people are starting to kind of renew that pipeline of collected trees, which has been good. I've been learning a lot about collecting, and then I'm excited to see people like Dylan Ferreira and Eric Schrader and John Eads. Like, we are getting some growers actually start to pop up that are local or semi-local. And hopefully those will lead to some more material. But there absolutely needs to be that, like, a beginner can get a like a good tree that is grown to become a bonsai, in a reasonable price range, instead of like their only avenue is multi-$1,000 material or crap. you know
Crap.
there's no in between. There's a hard to get something in between. It's like, I just want something very solid. It's not going to be the show winner, but it's like a healthy tree on the way to become a bonsai, and that can be tough sometimes. So
Sure. Even in the tropical world, that's the same case. I mean, today in the tropical world, if you want to get a good tree, you bring it out of state from Weigerts from in Florida, or you get it from in Alabama. The name is eluding me at the moment. But to get good old material, you pay a very pretty penny for it now.
yeah, yep.
And it's, I mean, I have some of those trees that I paid a very pretty penny for.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, over the years of collecting, you eventually, you take your shots at various periods, and I guess that's the cool thing, though. Like, hopefully these trees are, worth more than when you got them now, right? Because
For
the
sure.
hobby's grown a lot, and yeah, people are excited about it. So, and obviously you've taken good care of them. So, I never met Seiji Shiba, so I was interested to know a little bit more about him, and like his philosophies around bonsai and the influences that he had. Because that's like an era of the garden that I never really had any interaction with.
Well, the Japanese aesthetic is extremely strong with Seiji. So he amassed lots of writing material, photographs, and the like from colleagues and so forth. Went to Japan. He, of course, had his own business selling Japanese pots and trees. So he was an importer for a while until California became too rigid to let that happen. He was a character. He loved to go out and dig huge, massive trunks out of the ground. And so I remember him bringing into the garden a California juniper that he had just gotten. And it's just so gigantic. And Kathy and I looked at this, and several others looked at this and going, what the what the heck? What are we going to do with that? But, he had an eye for what it could become. And he would help us, in general, make it happen. So he was also good at styling until in his older days. But I mean, he was quite the accumulator. And one of the things that you hear about Seiji is what his home garden looked like. His home garden you couldn't even hardly walk into because it was so full of incredible material from around and about California. And the world, and actually in some of them. So he really had a vision of diversifying the types of trees in the garden. One of the things I remember him lecturing us on in the early days was, that we're going to have two trees of a particular species, and then we're going to have two more trees of another species, and we're going to keep this whole species diversity going through the garden. And you can still see that today, although it's pretty heavy on the juniper side today, but it was back then a lot more of the deciduous trees, a lot more euonymus, a lot more blooming flowering trees, and we see less of those as the garden has developed. But in that day he was very into diversifying the collection and amassing its content.
Interesting. That's a cool philosophy, and for a public collection, it's very interesting too, right? Just to have a variety of things for people to be able to see, because I think it opens people's eyes to what's possible in bonsai, and maybe they connect with a specific species more than another, and that sparks their journey into bonsai. Whereas, for your personal collection, if you really like junipers, like, go ahead and have all junipers, if you want it. Jerry won't like your collection, but do what you want. But I think for a public collection, that's actually a very good kind of principle to have.
Yeah, in DC, the Arboretum, it was actually more heavily on pine and junipers. Not a lot of deviation from that. So it's really good to come out here and see such a wide variety of tree material that can be made into a bonsai, and people take the risks to do it.
What's your thought on the overall trajectory of bonsai, like your observation?
Hills and valleys. I have to say that, it was hot, then it goes colder, then it goes hot again, and it goes colder. It all depends on the generation and the people's desire to take it on and commit to it. What I find probably most problematic in the Bay Area anyway is, and this is not an affront to you, but for the people who are younger, Their interests are family, career, and fancy cars. No, just not that far. No, but other things, right? And so they come in for a while, they get caught up for a few years in the bonsai stuff, and then life starts ballooning and happening around them, and they fall away. And hopefully, well, one of the things that Kathy and Gordon and I used to talk about was, hopefully those people will at some point in their career come back when they've settled out of that and they want to have a hobby or something that they can devote their time and energy to. But yeah, I mean, I find a lot of it's just really ups and downs, ups and downs, ups and downs along the way, and all depending upon age. We can't continue as a bonsai community to just court, say, I have to be careful how to say this, because, I'm not young puppy anymore either, but we cannot continue to court people who are retired only. We have to be able to make the clubs work and the organizations, the gardens and so forth, work with people who are not retired and still make it accessible for them.
Yeah.
Keep them committed.
Yeah, that is. I mean, I talked with Sam Tan a bit about this. It's it's not a coincidence that bonsai has a typically older demographic. Like, bonsai is synonymous with stability and being in one place, right? It's hard to move trees every few years, right? And so at a young age, and it's hard to at a young age commit to, oh, I'm going to be at my house 365 days a year, or I'm going to have someone watering my trees when I'm out for some period, right? So you do make a sacrifice to do bonsai. Whenever you're more static and stable and you're going to be in your house for the next 30 years or just your forever home, it's easier to make that choice to commit to bonsai versus at a younger age, you don't know, right? Maybe you have to move your job every 5 years or something like that to right. Focus on your career. But yeah, you're right. There's definitely that dichotomy, and I think if we want to see bonsai be successful, we need to find ways for it to be accessible, for people to get involved and give back to the community and also gain fulfillment out of the hobby at different ages or age ranges.
In Seiboku, we have a young man, Mr. Koss, who he and his mother joined the club a long time ago. He was very aggressively learning how to do bonsai, and then he went to school and he was away for college and all that, and it took him away. We don't hardly ever see him anymore, but when he comes back, he still plays with the plants in his mother's backyard. That's a good thing. That's what you need. You need to be able to catch them early enough and be able to inspire them to continue the
Yeah, I think whenever you catch that itch, it comes back to you, because I joined the Pittsburgh Bonsai Society for a year right when I was finishing high school, and then I went to college, and obviously it was tough to be moving I've moved to Colorado, so I was back and forth to Pennsylvania, and I had to kind of take a break for a bit. But then whenever I saw you guys at BGLM, that kind of re-sparked that journey for me, and here I am 7 years later or whatever. So I think people come back to it. I know, right? It seems like maybe a little longer. I don't know, but it's been a while. I got some great pictures of us from back in 2019 and 2020.
In the day.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. But it's good to see it's growing. So, do you have any advice for folks on learning? Looking back on your own journey, there's a lot more resources available now, but how would you suggest people get into bonsai or get better at bonsai today?
So I'm really disappointed. Back when I was in Kusamura, I taught a beginner's class. There was 9 classes, 9 weeks through a process, and I took very pertinent books of that I could actually teach from, so that they knew I wasn't just making this up somewhere along the way. And so we need teachers in those clubs to be able to teach people from the basics on the way up. And I fear, and I see even in our, in the Seiboku Club, just a lack of committing to that. There's a tree workshop maybe, but it kind of teaches people how to do trees, but it doesn't teach them from part 1 all the way through. And I think we really got to get our heads wrapped around training people horticulture in the art of bonsai, and so that they have success at doing it rather than here's a tree, let's just take its bark off, let's cut some branches and put some wire on it and pop it down into a icky soil and hope for the best. I mean, we just really got to teach people how to do it for success. And even in my own career, my own job as an IT guy, I teach people for success. I don't, from whatever starting point I have to come from to whatever ending point I need to go to, you just have to walk them through that process to be successful. And I really want to say that clubs really got to get their hands around the teaching part. And then people go, oh, I don't want to teach. I don't want to do. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. Well, there are some really good books out there. The Peter Warren book on bonsai that is extremely good as a student book you can take as a leader and distill it down for the students who are in the class. There's Jonas's books that can also be distilled down or expanded upon if you're taking the first one, that to teach people how to manage material. And you need to learn horticulture. And so this is funny because today I'm all about aesthetics, right? But when I go into clubs and I'm talking about a species in particular, it's all about horticulture because people don't know how to keep it alive. If you don't know how to keep it alive,
yeah, that's
why
that's the foundation, right? If the tree isn't growing healthily and alive, then you can't even do any of these other things on it. Like, throw aesthetics out the window. Like, aesthetics is the cherry on top that you get for doing the horticulture correctly, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. I think of myself not as a beginner anymore, and so I haven't really looked at some of these beginner books in the context of how are these structured as a textbook essentially for bonsai of A to B 1 to 2 year crash course that you could use. So I definitely want to take a look at some of those beginner books, and because I love teaching beginners. It's one of my favorite things to do as a part of the club, and I'm always trying to seek improvements to that process. Yeah, I'll have to borrow some of those books from you. And
so I know people can't see this. However, this Peter Warren's book on bonsai, is a textbook. It's modeled after the older version, and so it has a species section in the back, which I find very, very helpful. It has these discussions about what to do with a winter hazel, what's unique about that species. So this book is a huge textbook, and there's some stuff in there that I modify because, like with any textbook, the art has to be tailored to your area and to your general best practices. And so there's a few things in there, which is why I say I take the book in and I distill it down and I change it up and I put it back out to the student and say, this is what you should aim for. The book's going to tell you to wire it, blah, 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 blah. We're not going to do that. We're going to skip that part. We're going to go to the next part. And then the other one that, if everybody's ever interested, is this is one of my tropical mentors, and he passed away recently. So this is the World of Ficus Bonsai by Jerry Meislick. And he was a friend of Kathy Shainer's as well. And he and I chatted a lot about species, and I learned a lot of stuff from him. And he signed 2 of his books and sent them to me for free. I was really quite impressed. But yeah, he's going to be a big miss because he was just an expert. There aren't any to replace him really well that can teach well like he did.
Yeah, I love that idea of, it's definitely inspiring some thoughts in me around having a book that goes along with, or a more structured curriculum that goes along with learning that first 1 to 2 years of bonsai, and attaching it to hey, buy this tree from Lowe's or whatever, buy this juniper, and then we're going to go through this process.
Well, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So in my classes, we did that. So in my Kusumura beginner classes, we'd send them out there and say, go to the nursery, you can buy these types of material. Do not buy anything outside of that. Yeah. Because as a beginner, you don't want to pick up a pine and think you're going to do something with it. So we gave them some basics and sent them out to go get it, and they bring that material in, and we start the class and run the 8 weeks to the point where at the end of that period, we would have something to add to the show's in progress section if they had done it successfully. And some of them did. I mean, some of them went on to show that first tree in a club show.
Very cool. Yeah, that's a really good idea. Definitely gonna noodle a little bit more on that, and I'm always trying to improve the kind of beginner content that we have out there for our club to help people on board to actually like making bonsai trees, right?
And the other thing that I always suggest people do is, and this is a handout that I used to send out, and this is the style chart.
Mm,
I found a really good style catalog of bonsai styles and included the Japanese words and the English words above it so that you would have it. And I also customized it. So you can get a lot of these out there, but some of them are just not very good. Some of them are really show bad examples of a tree design. But you can get a good chart and customize it for your training scenario so that people then pick up the aesthetics, what you're looking for, what's the front. Why we talk about this all the time. The front, the nabari, the branch structure, where they're at. Do you have depth? Do you have front? All that kind of fun stuff. And they're only going to learn that if you show them the kinds of charts and then show them in reality what the tree looks like if it's been done correctly.
what advice do you have for teachers? Like exactly like those kind of tips for people that want to teach beginners. Obviously, you've dealt with a lot of them, me included. So it worked, I guess, to some extent. So I'm curious, yeah, what advice you have for teachers? I think that having that handout, that's very interesting, and connecting aesthetics at an early time.
One of the interesting things I learned about in the teaching process is being at the bonsai school at Lake Merritt. Were you ever a part of that?
I was, yeah.
You were, right? So there were some good teachers there. The ones that were prepared, the ones that came in knowing what they were going to say and what they were going to do, were successful. And then there were some people who just got up there with a tree and just, blah, 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 blah. Made no sense. There was no beginning, no end. There was no,
Structure, curriculum.
structure,
Yeah,
right?
outline.
And so and I am a teacher. So I have taught classes from my college high school days actually through all the way up to today. So I really think you have to be prepared. You have to have a structure. You need to know and be confident in what you're relaying too. If you're a teacher who's fumbling her way through any particular topic, you're not going to be successful with your students. You've got to know the beginning, the middle, the end of any particular session, and really get that under your belt. And don't be afraid to say it. I mean, I've had people who tell me they don't want to teach because they're afraid to talk in public. Well, get over it.
What do you think about one thing I struggle with teaching is I'll often go like, what's the right level of complexity or depth to teach beginners? Because I can start talking about repotting and start going into like Yamadori repots with steel, versus that's not what a beginner needs to hear, right? So how do you tread that line correctly between not giving enough information and giving too much information?
So remember my starting point. My starting point is horticulture. So you have this plant, and you wanna train it to behave in a certain way. So let's talk about how to keep the plant, what the growing environment is like. And then let's talk about how the plant grows. And once you know those two pieces, then we can say, how can we modify this plant to do what you want it to do, to become the tree you envision it to be once you pick a style for it? I mean, you just have to back it up. You can't launch into. So I some of the club meetings I go to just drive me batshit crazy. I'm sorry about that, but they do, because you'll have some expert up there in front of on the table meandering about. This, you're going to take this trunk over here and you're going to split it over there and you're going to blah. The younger folks, the beginners, there's nothing but mystifies them. It's magic. It's all it is, magic. Because they don't have the training wheels in order to be able to navigate it.
Well, that goes into a whole other thing about whether or not club meetings are even a good place to teach, right? Versus entertainment and
Precisely.
social. Yeah, but I'm definitely let's chat some more off the podcast as well about beginner curriculums. I'd love to get your expertise. I mean, it sounds like essentially you're saying there's a lot of ground to make up in bonsai, like just by teaching something structured and intentional, you can go way further than a lot of the trainings that are out there. So I wanted to touch on one other thing. Recently, you had reached out to me and we talked about me kind of carrying on the legacy of one of your trees. And I was really touched by that, and it really means a lot to me. But I was curious, like, I think you've got a very generous heart, and that's shown not just through this, but through a lot of other things that I've seen you do in the community and how you give back. But I'm just curious of, like, what are your hopes for the bonsai community, and what kind of drove you to, I think a lot of people can kind of get into a mindset of like, oh, I'm going to hold on to these trees until, where's your headspace at where you're thinking about like, oh, this is something that I want to pass on?
In my years in California, I have seen too many people die with too many trees unresolved, or they can no longer take care of them, so that the trees all die, and then they're depressed and upset about that and whatever, or they call out to a few of us in the club and say, can you come rescue my trees periodically? And we go out there and we do the best we can. But in general, I learned that hoarding trees does no one any good. One of my, going way back in time, so John and Sandy Planting had huge amounts of extremely wonderful material, but they couldn't take care of it. And as the older they got, the more out of control they got, and they wouldn't sell it. So so you just start seeing the collection just devolve and die and end up in the trash bins and the like. And I promised myself I was never going to be that way. So if you open your eyes and look around your community and understand where they're at in their age process and their volume of material, you just have to say, don't be one of those who has several hundred trees. Seiji passed away. There were hundreds of trees in the backyard. Some of them never got watered anymore. Some of them just died. It's a disfavor to the art to let it devolve to that point. And I've not read in Japan if that's a thing. It seems to me that when a master passes in Japan, the collections get moved about and continue, right? I don't read about in Japan that a master passes away and all their trees are dead. It's not, hopefully that would be not the case there. But in this country, we just seem to want to hoard. And I just go, no, don't do that. Just don't be one of those. And as your health fails, like as in my cases, where I'm not able to lift things above a certain weight limit, you have to make a decision to move your best material out to someone who's young and eager and talented and have it continue its path, right? And I've done that not just with trees to you, but I've also done that with others that I can no longer handle that tree. We either sell them at auction, or we move them out into a club sale, or we try to get, move them out to somebody else. Because my collection today is Chuhin and smaller, so mostly Shohins and even a few Mame here. But I can handle those, and I know I can lift them and move them around and everything. But there for a while, on those benches in my balcony apartment patio, it was too packed and too heavy. And as you saw, you were here some of those days, we couldn't repot the trees anymore. So you have to make a decision. Do you want to let the trees continue a life beyond you? If so, make a deal and move them out.
Yep. Wow. Yeah, I mean, knock on wood, you'll be around for a long time and be able to still see these trees in collections around the Bay that you've influenced. But I think that's I hope that whenever I have my eyes open as well, right? Whenever it's the right time for me to pass on trees or have too many trees. Because I think, there is this tendency to, just like you said, and
more.
Yeah, and I think bonsai is an interesting thing where, unlike, a inanimate object, there is almost some responsibility to the living things, right? Or I think so. And so, you want to make sure that you're doing the respectful thing, and I mean, it's probably a really special moment for both the person getting the tree and for you, right? To see these trees and know that they're gonna, proliferate.
Go
exactly. Yes, exactly.
Do your thing.
Awesome. Well, this has been a lot of fun, Jerry. Anything else that you on your mind that you want to chat about?
Oh, we could just go on for hours and days, but I think we better stop it somewhere along there.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much for, helping me start my journey and always being there to answer questions and, being a great part of the bonsai community in the Bay Area. We're definitely blessed to have you. So thank you so much, and looking forward to seeing you soon.